The hope of the Jews for a Messiah comes from ancient prophecies that speak of a leader who would liberate Israel and bring peace and justice. It was expected that this Messiah would be a descendant of King David, someone who would lead Israel back to glory and bring salvation to the people. However, Jesus did not fulfill these expectations, as instead of leading as a warrior or king, he preached love, forgiveness, and humility. He did not overthrow the Romans or establish a kingdom on earth, which left many Jews disappointed. Jesus, with his silent steps through the hills of Galilee, did not come to be a king with sword and crown, but rather to sow seeds of an invisible kingdom in the hearts of men. This kingdom is not won with swords and shields, but with acts of love and words of peace. When we talk about Jesus, we speak of a carpenter who turned water into wine and fed crowds with just a few loaves and fish. These stories that echo through the centuries are like rivers that always find their way to the sea, showing us that true power lies not in taking away, but in multiplying, not in dividing, but in uniting. The parables he told were like pearls cast to the listeners, each with a unique shine, revealing deep truths about forgiveness and mercy. How can we forget the prodigal son, the young man who went out into the world, spent all he had, and in the end realized that his father's love was the true treasure? The father's embrace upon reuniting with his son was the very depiction of divine forgiveness, a forgiveness that does not count offenses but welcomes with open arms. Love, this recurring theme in Jesus' teachings, was shown not only in words but in actions. There he was, touching the lepers, talking with the outcasts, reaching out to the fallen. This love was like a gentle rain that falls after a long period of drought, reviving everything it touches and transforming arid lands into flourishing gardens. Therefore, although many expected a Messiah who wielded the sword, what Jesus offered was the olive branch of peace. He did not come to break the Roman yoke with violence, but to break the chains of hatred and prejudice with the gentle strength of his presence. And even when he was crucified, with a crown of thorns replacing the gold one that some desired for him, his response was a prayer for his executioners. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That whispered plea for forgiveness between the shadows of the cross was like the song of the nightingale in the silence of the night, a reminder that true greatness can emerge from the depths of suffering. The symbolism of the cross, which for many represents only pain, for others is a beacon of hope, pointing to the resurrection that promises new life to all who believe. The rejection of Jesus by the Jews is an ancient debate that dates back to the origins of Christianity. While there are various reasons for this disbelief, we can group them into three categories: theological differences, expectations about the Messiah, and cultural issues. But what are these theological differences? At the core of Jewish theology, God is seen as one and indivisible, a concept that resonates deeply within the walls of synagogues and in the hearts of its faithful. This God, portrayed in the sacred writings, is a beacon of unity that neither divides nor multiplies. When Jesus enters the scene, presenting himself not only as a messenger, but as the very Son of God, it shakes the ground beneath the feet of devout Jews. For them, hearing someone proclaim themselves as the Son of God, walking on earth in human form, was as shocking as seeing the sunrise in the west. Jesus spoke of an intimate relationship with God, calling him Father, something unprecedented and unsettling for many who strictly followed the laws of Moses. "I and the Father are one," he would say, and this statement echoed through the hills of Jerusalem like thunder on a clear day. To the Jews, this sounded like a radical departure from the faith they knew, a faith centered on the worship of a formless God who could never be confused with a human figure. Furthermore, the implications of this new doctrine brought a wind of change that many were not ready to face. The Messiah they expected should have been a terrestrial liberator, a warrior king who would restore the state of Israel and free it from the grip of Roman oppressors. However, Jesus preached a different kingdom, not one of swords and shields, but a kingdom of spirits and truths, invisible to the eyes but palpable to the heart. "My kingdom is not of this world," he would affirm, outlining a kingdom that defied everyone's expectations. And the cultural issues? These were as deeply rooted as the olive trees on the hills of Judah. The Jewish society of that time deeply valued tradition and established order. Jesus, with his revolutionary ideas and his circle of followers from all layers of society, was seen as both an innovator and a disruptor of peace. He conversed with sinners, touched the impure, and challenged the teachings of the priests and Pharisees, disrupting the delicate balance of social order. Jesus not only challenged theological concepts and messianic expectations, but he also shook the entire structure. His parables, full of hidden meanings and universal truths, spoke of forgiveness and unconditional love, pillars that, though beautiful, were foreign to the rigidity of the Jewish law of the time. The people expected a leader who would assert his power and domination, but Jesus offered a path of humility and service. The gap between what was expected and what was manifested was too great for some, as vast as the starry sky over the Negev desert. This rejection, therefore, was not merely a matter of misunderstanding or stubbornness. It was a clash of fundamentals, a meeting of opposing tides that, despite its potential to create a new form of faith, ended up reinforcing long-established divisions. Like a lighthouse that illuminates different paths in the darkness, Jesus proposed a new way of understanding God, but not everyone was ready to navigate the unknown waters he revealed. Originally, the Jews were monotheists, worshipping a single God in synagogues and temples throughout the Jewish world. Belief in a single God was essential to them. Jesus, on the other hand, presented himself as equal to God, which was seen as blasphemy by the Jews, contradicting their conception of God. The Bible does not clearly state that Jesus claimed to be God, but it mentions that he said he was one with God, which generates ambiguous interpretations. The complication increases when, according to the Gospel of John, some Jews accuse Jesus of blasphemy, saying, "We do not stone you for a good work, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God." Jesus does not defend himself clearly, which reinforces the impression that he believed in what he said. Just imagine, if even today words can be misinterpreted, what about in those ancient times, where every word carried the weight of centuries of traditions? The news that a man walking among them could dare to declare himself divine was like thunder in a clear sky. For many, it sounded more like a challenge than like good news. At the heart of this matter was a deep abyss of understanding. For the Jews, worshipping one God was the foundation of everything. It was the pillar that not only sustained them, but also defined them as people. When Jesus spoke about his union with God, he was not trying to erase or rewrite that central truth, but he was trying to deepen their understanding of who God is and how he could relate to his children. But, how good intentions sometimes get lost in translation. The reaction to these words was a mixture of indignation and curiosity. Some saw Jesus as a revolutionary, perhaps even a heretic. Others, however, felt that his words carried something more, a breath of something new, and in some ways wonderfully liberating. After all, if God was so close, so intertwined with humanity, what would that mean for their daily lives? The possibility was at once frightening and appealing. Jesus, with his unique ability to touch people's hearts through parables and acts of compassion, was painting a picture of a God not distant, ruling from an unreachable throne, but of a loving father eager to walk alongside his children in the dust of life's roads. This was an image that challenged the rigid and sometimes cold conception many had. He offered a relationship, not a religion of empty rituals. But as with any significant change, Jesus' proposals were not received with open arms by all. The guardians of tradition saw it as a threat to their power and authority. After all, people who find God in their hearts and experiences are people who do not need intermediaries, and thus the words of Jesus that intended to bring peace and unity also ended up sparking conflict. The symbolism of Jesus as God is another point worth reflecting. While many expected a leader who would liberate them through power and strength, Jesus presented himself as a lamb foreshadowing his sacrifice. This gesture, which would culminate in his crucifixion, was the true face of divine power, not a power that dominates and destroys, but a power that surrenders and restores. The idea of the Trinity also does not fit in with Jewish beliefs. Jews follow the Shema, which affirms, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Meanwhile, Christianity introduced the concept of three divinities, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which directly contradicts the Jewish belief in one God. Beyond theological differences, Jesus' message of mercy and forgiveness contrasted with the Jewish vision of a God who rewarded the obedient and punished the disobedient. This was enough for many Jews to reject his teachings. Messianic expectations also contributed to disbelief. The Jews of that time expected a Messiah who would liberate them from Roman rule and restore the earthly kingdom of Israel. They expected a political and victorious leader, not someone who would die at the hands of his enemies. In this scenario, Jesus came up with a proposal that turned what many expected upside down. He spoke of a kingdom, yes, but not one built with stones and fortresses. Instead, it was founded in the hearts and spirits of men and women. This vision was so different that many could not see beyond their dreams of liberation and power. For them, a Messiah who spoke of serving others and loving enemies was like a gentle rain in the middle of a forest fire, insufficient and disappointing. Jesus, however, insisted that his path was that of true transformative power. "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," he said, completely inverting the notion of strength and conquest. For those accustomed to thinking in terms of armies and victories, such words sounded like a melody played backwards, difficult to comprehend and easy to reject. Furthermore, Jesus' fate, his death on the cross, was the final blow for many. How could the expected liberator, the promised Messiah, end in such a humiliating and painful way? In their minds, the cross was not a symbol of salvation, but of absolute defeat. A crucified Messiah was contrary to any sign of victory they had hoped to witness. But this point of rupture, this seemingly tragic end, was the heart of the message Jesus came to bring. The cross was not an end, but a new beginning. Through his resurrection, he showed that the true kingdom he proposed was indestructible, not subdued by pain, suffering, or even death. It was a silent but profound revolution that began in the soul and spread like the sunrise after a long night. Maimonides, an important Jewish thinker, argued that God has no physical form and is eternal and infinite. To claim that God could become human is to minimize his divinity, something incompatible with Jewish scriptures that affirm God is not mortal. Following this line of thought, the idea of an incarnate God as presented in Christianity was a real thorn in the side for many Jews of the time. For them, how could the divine infinity that fills the heavens and earth condense into a single human figure, subject to pain and death? This concept not only challenged, but seemed to twist the ancient roots of their faith. The coming of Jesus, with his miracles and teachings about the nature of God, sought to extend a bridge over this theological abyss. "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father," he said, attempting to explain that his presence among men was a mirror of the divine, not a reduction. However, this bridge often seemed more like a mirage, difficult to cross for those firmly anchored in tradition. This resistance was not just a matter of stubbornness or lack of vision. It was as if, over the centuries, the Jewish people had built a robust wall, stone upon stone, of convictions and laws that clearly defined who God was. The arrival of Jesus, with his revolutionary ideas, seemed more like a schism than a message of salvation, shaking the structures that had seemed unshakable until then. And so, the figure of Jesus, instead of being seen as a blessing, was often perceived as a storm stirring the calm waters of the Jewish faith. For many, accepting that God could cry, sweat, and bleed was like trying to fit the ocean into a jar, a challenge both logical and spiritual that many were not willing to face. Yet at the heart of this hurricane of doubts and debates, Jesus' teachings on love, forgiveness, and humility continued to germinate in open hearts, suggesting that perhaps the true grandeur of God lay not in distance and impassibility, but in closeness and vulnerability. Through his life and finally, through his death and resurrection, he showed that the true face of God was unconditional love, a love that does not hesitate to descend to the depths of the human condition to touch and transform souls in pain. Therefore, the dialogue between what Maimonides taught and what was lived by Jesus continues to be a fertile ground for reflection. While one emphasizes the absolute transcendence of God, the other reveals a God who is immanent, walking alongside his followers, a shepherd who knows each sheep by name. Cultural differences also influenced the rejection of Jesus. Jewish society was highly stratified, with priests and religious leaders holding high positions. Jesus, on the other hand, preached a message accessible to all, challenging the social structure of the time and threatening the positions of established leaders. Imagine that he came without pomp or privilege, speaking of a kingdom where the last would be first and the first last. A true revolution, not only spiritual but also social, which questioned the existing order. Furthermore, Jesus did not limit himself to preaching in synagogues, but extended his words through the streets, fields, and lakes, reaching fishermen, tax collectors, and even the marginalized, who were rarely seen near the high echelons of religious society. His approach was like a fresh breeze on a stuffy day, offering relief and hope to those who had felt ignored for so long. The religious leaders, accustomed to almost unquestionable respect, saw this new teacher as a direct threat. How could someone without any title of nobility or known priestly lineage challenge centuries of tradition? Jesus' teachings that placed love and compassion above ceremonies and titles were like a mirror that did not reflect the image they desired to see. And it didn't stop there. Jesus' parables, full of wisdom and insights, often exposed the hypocrisies and injustices practiced by those who claimed to be guardians of the faith. His stories were simple, but their messages were profound, directly touching the heart of the law to love God above all else and your neighbor as yourself. This disarming simplicity was revolutionary. The reaction to this message was mixed. While some saw in Jesus the promise of a new beginning, others felt as if the ground was shaking beneath their feet. For them, the possibility of losing their status and power was a storm forming on the horizon, threatening and inevitable. The climax of this tension came with acts like the cleansing of the temple, where Jesus criticized the merchants openly, viewing it as an exploitation of faith. This action not only symbolized his disdain for religious corruption, but also marked his position against the abuse of power. It was as if he were sweeping away impurities, not just from the sacred ground, but trying to cleanse the very heart of religion. Therefore, the difference between Jesus and the leaders of the time lay not just in his ideas, but in his practice. He didn't just preach a new understanding of God, but demonstrated through his actions how to live according to this understanding. He personified his message, walking among the people, healing, teaching, and above all, serving. Thus, while some clung to traditions and power, others found in Jesus a path of true transformation. It was a choice between maintaining the structures of the past or embracing the promise of a future where every person, regardless of their social position, could find their place in the Son, in God's kingdom. The inclusion preached by Jesus, which encompassed the marginalized, such as the sick and the poor, was seen as subversive. His way of teaching and the miracles he performed were seen as threats to the authority of the leaders, destabilizing the established order. It was as if each step he took towards the forgotten removed a brick from the wall of segregation and prejudice. He demonstrated in practice that no one was beyond the reach of divine love and compassion, and how difficult it was for the powerful to understand this. For them, the social order in which the less fortunate remained on the margins was not only natural but necessary. But Jesus, with his radical inclusion, painted a new picture where everyone had a place at the table, regardless of their physical, social, or economic condition. This was not just revolutionary, it was a direct challenge to the established norms. Imagine the scene: Jesus surrounded by lepers, beggars, and women, seen as impure, all listening intently to his words of hope and redemption. This image was powerful and provocative. It was as if he were weaving a new social tapestry where the discarded threads were now essential for the final design. The miracles of Jesus especially served as signs that something grand was happening. They were not just demonstrations of divine power, but manifestations of a new order where suffering was not ignored. Each healing, each miracle, was a sign that the last could indeed be first in the kingdom of God. Of course, this deeply disturbed those at the top of the religious hierarchy. Each miracle of Jesus was like a blow to their authority. Each parable was a critique of their interpretation of the law. The way Jesus dealt with the marginalized not only questioned the legitimacy of their power, but undermined the very foundation upon which that power was built. Thus, it is no surprise that the tension between Jesus and the religious leaders increased with every person he touched, with every outcast brought to the center of the community. The old structures trembled as the old walls of exclusion began to crack under the weight of a love that knew no barriers. It is important to note that the rejection of Jesus did not mean the Jews were less religious. They continued to follow their traditions and practices, maintaining their faith even after Jesus' death. The issue was not a lack of faith, but differences in theology, culture, and expectations. Additionally, it is crucial to understand that the rejection of Jesus by the Jews should not be seen as a rejection of his message of love and compassion. Many Jews were influenced by his ethical and moral teachings, even without accepting him as the Messiah. It is also important to recognize that this rejection does not justify anti-Semitism or the historical persecution that Jews have faced over the centuries. The New Testament contains several passages suggesting the divinity of Jesus. For example, the second epistle of Peter speaks of the righteousness of our God and Savior Jesus Christ, suggesting a fusion of the figures of God and Jesus. Peter's message, intertwining Jesus' humanity with his divinity, offers a light that can guide the understanding of both religious traditions, showing that, at its core, what was being presented was a new way of seeing the relationship between God and humanity. Additionally, the story of the disciple Thomas, who only believed in the resurrection after touching Jesus' wounds, reflects the complexity of human faith. This narrative, rich in detail and emotion, symbolizes the journey of doubt and discovery that every believer may face. It is as if each of us is invited to cross the door of disbelief to find a deeper and more personal faith. Therefore, the stories of the New Testament are not just records of events, they are like open windows to a broader understanding of divine purpose. Each miracle, each parable, and each gesture of compassion from Jesus serves as an echo that transcends time, calling everyone to reflect on the true meaning of salvation and redemption. Thus, when we look at the figure of Jesus through these texts, we do not just see a religious leader or a social reformer. We see a master of humanity whose actions and words continue to challenge, inspire, and transform hearts and minds, regardless of religious or historical boundaries. It is this universality of Jesus' teachings that can serve as a point of unity between distinct cultures and religions. His call to love one's neighbor, forgive unconditionally, and seek justice are not just Christian principles, but fundamental human values that have the power to transcend even the deepest divisions. The story of Thomas, known as Saint Thomas, exemplifies this vision. After the resurrection, he refuses to believe until he can see and touch the marks of crucifixion on Jesus. When he finally does, he exclaims, "My Lord and my God." This expression of Thomas, which has become a mantra for skepticism with the phrase, "seeing is believing," highlights the complexity of Christian faith in accepting Jesus not only as a spiritual leader, but as God himself. The question of Jesus' divinity remains a point of contention between Jews and Christians, with profound implications for both religions. The interpretation of scriptures and the understanding of God are fundamentally different. The figure of Jesus unfolds in various layers, each revealing a different aspect of his mission and nature. For Christians, Thomas's declaration is not just a moment of recognition, but a revelation of Jesus' true identity, opening a door to the understanding of his intertwined divine and human nature. On the other hand, for many Jews, the idea of God becoming man remains inconceivable, holding fast to the belief in a unique and eternal God, transcendent and above any human form. This difference is not only theological, but touches on the core of how each tradition views the relationship between the Creator and creation. This contrast leads us to reflect on the role of doubts and questions in the journey of faith. Like Thomas, many of us need to see to believe, seeking tangible signs to strengthen our belief. This search, far from being a sign of weakness, is an essential part of spiritual growth, allowing faith to deepen and solidify through personal experience and reflection. The story of Thomas resonates with a universal appeal to questioning and the pursuit of a faith that is not based solely on traditions, but is lived and confirmed in each individual's heart. It is a reminder that faith, at its core, is a continuous dialogue not only with scriptures and teachings, but with the depths of our souls. Moreover, this episode highlights Jesus' mercy and patience toward those who doubt. He does not rebuke Thomas for his unbelief, but gently invites him to see and touch, demonstrating that true faith often arises from vulnerability and the awareness of our uncertainties. This approach by Jesus can serve as a model for how we deal with differences in belief within and between our communities. Instead of demanding conformity or condemning doubt, we can offer space for questioning and discovery, facilitating an environment where faith can grow authentically and personally. Therefore, the story of Thomas is not just an account of a personal conversion, but an invitation to all of us to embrace our doubts as part of the journey of faith. In this sense, it teaches us that true faith is not the absence of doubt, but the courage to confront it, seeking in God the answers that the human heart so deeply yearns for. Thus, while Christians and Jews may continue to have distinct visions of Jesus' nature, both can find in Thomas's example a call to reflection and dialogue. After all, it is in the exchange of ideas and experiences that we can find common ground, learning from one another and perhaps bringing our understandings of the divine closer together. Therefore, however, each tradition interprets Jesus' divinity. The important thing is to keep the doors of dialogue open, allowing each question and doubt to be stepping stones toward a deeper faith and broader understanding. Concluding that Jesus is the Messiah and the Son of God would require many Jews to radically reinterpret their traditional monotheistic beliefs. This would represent a significant alteration in the Jewish understanding of God as a singular entity. The dialogue between Jews and Christians on these issues remains crucial. It helps promote mutual understanding and respect, despite deep theological differences. And you, what do you think about Jesus Christ? Was he the Son of God? I have no doubts that he was. Share your opinion in the comments. Until next time, may God bless you. We have reached the end of our video, and I hope you like it. If you're looking for inspiration, knowledge, and spiritual connection, don't let this opportunity pass you by. Subscribe to our channel now, leave your like and comment to strengthen our community. And if you want to help us continue sharing religious stories that touch hearts, become a channel member. Together we can make a difference and strengthen our spiritual journey. We're counting on you. We've left the link in the description of this video so you can become a member today. Continue watching videos about the history of the Bible. I will leave 2 recommendations here on the screen. God bless you. We will get to the next video.